I lost one. Actually, yes.
Does
Nah.
Does first summary have to extend all defense for it to be a final?
You can do this one. I'll just close.
You should let it know. Does first summary have to extend all defense for it to be a final focus?
For summary, if you have preferably go in order of responding back to your arguments and then sending your
For summary?
Yeah.
Okay. So like their case, our case, do you want that order?
Whichever one works better for you, we'll still like according to that order. Just signpost when you switch. So like whatever order
Okay,
or
so
time.
just sign it.
It's up to you.
Then in that case, is that already? Christina and I formed the resolution. NCAA student athletes ought to be recognized as employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Our sole contention is proper compensation. Subpoint 8 is breaking even. There are two ways that paying students would benefit them financially. First is wages. Jacob of Business Insider finds that college football players average 40 hours each on both athletics and academics, resulting in an 80-hour work week that is far more challenging than many full-time jobs. Fortunately, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, the FLSA establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record-keeping, and youth employment standards affecting employees, allowing student-athletes to be entitled to compensation in the form of federal minimum wages. The NCAA currently justifies overworking athletes by citing compensation in the form of scholarships, but colleges frequently do not offer enough scholarships to provide for players financially. So Rossi of the NCPA explains that the NCAA mandated scholarship shortfall leaves players with thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket expenses. Fulton 2014 furthers that many students on scholarship come from low-income families who would otherwise not be able to pay for college, and the NCAA restricts a student-athlete's ability to get a job, meaning that athletes have to come up with the money for school without being able to pay for it, or without being able to work for it. The second reason is by letting athletes profit. Log of BR explains that the NCAA currently prohibits student-athletes from profiting off their image, citing that students cannot receive a form of pay as they're not employees. Classifying students as employees would let them reap the benefits of their fame. And this is immensely beneficial, as a study by Drexel University found that the market value of the average college football player is $178,000 per year, while the projected market value for average college basketball players is $375,000. The impact of paying players is alleviating poverty. Edelman 2014 explained that the current system ensures sustained poverty for many of the athletes who provide their labor. 85% of college athletes on scholarship live below the poverty line. A 2012 NCAA report found that in all sports but baseball, however, the chances of playing professionally after college was less than 2%. And without financial compensation, student athletes who are often not allowed to get jobs find themselves financially stranded. 50% of athletes thus drop out in search of unrealistic professional contracts to chase money, thus denying themselves a diploma. This is problematic because the APL concludes that on an annual basis, bachelor degree holders earn about $32,000 more than those whose highest degree is a high school diploma, reducing poverty in the long term. Subpoint B is workers' compensation. Nearly all student athletes will experience wear and tear on their bodies that they may not have anticipated. In fact, 2014 from the American Audiological Society estimates that in NCAA sports, there is upwards of 210,000 injuries annually. However, Philip Litchfield of the Chicago-Kent College of Law explains that up to this point, universities have been immune from judgments that other employers would typically have to pay. Because NCAA student-athletes are not employees, workers' compensation and tort claims are unable to hold up in court. Should the schools pay their student-athletes, however, this relationship will change, and the university's primary defense to these claims will disappear in court, allowing these students to gain workers' compensation. Furthermore, Walsh from the Atlantic writes that there is no provision in the Division I manual to prohibit a coach from revoking a scholarship the year after a recruit gets hurt. For those poor families without enough coverage through a parent, this means that a young man or woman can be enlisted on a promise of an education, get injured on the field, and lose his or her only source of medical insurance precisely when he or she needs it the most. The necessity for workers' compensation becomes especially prominent as the Kaiser Family Foundation and the New York Times found that 35% of people reported that they could not pay for basic needs, such as housing, food, or heat because of their medical bills, while 61% said that these expenses made it significantly harder to pay for their bills. Thus, for these reasons, advocate for the rights of students and affirm.
Okay, is anyone not ready?
Give me a second. Alright.
Alright, time starts now. Meaning gate. Our first contention is preventing kids from going to college. Brian Burnside 2015 explains that even though many colleges are rapidly increasing athletic spending, only 24 colleges have actually made a profit. Even worse, Burnside finds that as spending outpaces revenue, colleges are forced to make a trade-off and take more institutional funds. This diversion of funds will only increase in a world where we pay student athletes. This happens in two ways. First is tuitions. Dorfman from Forbes in 2013 explains that by paying student athletes, you will force colleges to increase student tuitions. This increase has already happened before. Greenwald, the Huffington Post in 2013 finds that states that have high athletic spending have seen a 65% increase in college tuitions. Problematically, David Hellman of Cornell University finds that a $100 increase in tuitions leads to a 0.25% decrease in enrollment. By affirming, you prevent tens of thousands of people from attending college. Second, by getting rid of lower-level programs. As established, the majority of colleges are not money makers. This is extremely problematic, as Larry Scott of USA Today in 2017 finds that with the introduction of wages, many lower-level, non-profitable sports programs would go extinct. This reaction to an increase in spending has already happened before, as Katie Thomas in 2011 finds that after the implementation of Title IX, many colleges cut off men's programs instead of expanding women's programs. Overall, cutting programs stops students from going to college. Empirically, Miller of CPM writes that the death of sports programs could cut the enrollment rate in colleges by up to 50%. The impact of keeping students in school and graduation is extremely significant. As Philip of the University of Maine explains, that the probability of being employed as a graduate is 24% higher, with 134% higher annual earnings and a poverty rate 3.5 times lower. Raising tuition and removing lower-level programs removes such opportunity for the mass majority of student athletes and the general student body. Contention 2 is maintaining the cycle of reform. Every time society calls for reform, the NCAA answers. For example, Powell of the New York Times reports that when NCAA athletes threatened to unionize in 2015, the organization started providing guaranteed four-year scholarships, bigger scholarship stipends, and postgraduate health care. This is because whenever the media attacks the NCAA, they attempt to insulate themselves by giving student athletes more benefits. We see this today, as O'Donnell of SB Nation writes in 2017 that due to status quo distrust in the NCAA perpetrated by media outlets, the president of the organization is promising more reform. These new policies can be seen specifically in two areas. First is scholarships. Doug of IHE writes that a crucial part of NCAA reform is scholarships. More specifically, he finds that they are now expanding scholarships to include the full cost of tuition, multi-year scholarships, and spreading them more equally so that the playing field is more equal, all contributing to providing more opportunities for students who attend college. Ross of the New Republic finds the majority of low-income students attend college through scholarships as they can't afford to go on their own. This is crucial as the Seattle Times finds through a scholarship you have a 90% chance of getting a job, breaking the cycle of poverty. Second is quality of education. The Denver Post writes that another big part of NCAA reform is improving the quality of education. Specifically, they find that students are now getting more time to study or to find internships. More so, the Denver Post concludes by finding that scholarships now will remain with the student even if they get injured, shifting the focus away from sports and towards academics. This means more people graduating, as Stanford University finds a correlation between the quality of education and the graduation rate. However, recognizing students under the Fair Labor Standards Act ends all their reform for two reasons. First, because it creates a false sense of legitimacy. Ross of the New Republic finds that by paying student athletes, you create a false sense of you give a sense of legitimacy that the NCAA is taking action, and thus gives everyone a false sense of security. This allows the NCAA to go back to their old roots and stop new reform from happening. But second, by creating a trade-off. Harrison Marcus of the LW writes that if you were to pay college athletes, you'd see a direct trade-off with status quo benefits, such as free academic support, superior health care, and elite facilities, among others. Ultimately, Ross concludes saying paying student athletes would do nothing to end the exploitation of student athletes due to the inherently profit-based system the NCAA has created. Rather, Ross writes that the only way to end student exploitation and create a truly educational system for student athletes is through the structural reform of the NCAA, which can only happen when you negate the resolution. Time starts.
Well,
Oh,
okay.
well,
Okay. On your second warrant, in your second contention, talk about improving the quality of education. How does this happen?
Well, by getting student athletes better working conditions inside of college.
How does that
Well,
improve education?
Well, first of all, they tell you specifically that we're increasing the amount of time they have to study, which means less time in the field.
Wait, if anything,
second.
when you pay athletes, don't they want to spend more time on sports because then they earn more money?
Wait, so if you pay student athletes, that's like a turn on your whole case. Because you're saying that if you pay student athletes, you allow them to stay in school longer. And stay in sports that shifts their focus away onto athletics, right?
Okay, so then how? Okay.
I don't know where you're getting with this. You're running quality of
Okay, yeah.
education yourself. Okay, I'm gonna take a question.
Sure.
So let's talk about the fact that you tell me 50% of people drop out.
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Because they can't afford the education.
Really, or because they want to leave to go to the pros? Which one is it?
Like, the reason why they want to go pro is because they believe that's where the money is.
Okay, so
they
okay,
take the gamble
so
to go
how does
pro
that incentive
because
go
they can't
away?
afford their education anymore.
Wait, so if I call for the evidence, we'll say specifically that they left because
Like, that's
they
the
couldn't
analysis
pay.
that we make.
Yeah, what does the card tell you? What does the
The card
statistic
says
say?
that 50% of, like, student athletes drop out of, like,
Because sports is where the money is, right?
Like, because they don't have money, so they go to sports.
But your evidence doesn't say that, right?
Like,
It just says that 50% of
we
student
see that
athletes drop out.
85% of students on scholarship, of student athletes living on scholarship, are under the poverty line. So it's a pretty clear warning. Can I have another question? So you talk about complacency as an impact of of your second contention. So then how does passing students, like paying student athletes, prevent future reform?
So we tell you specifically two reasons. Actually, the first one tells you specifically, Ross tells you that paying student athletes to give a false legitimacy to the NCAA. That means that people think that the NCAA is passing reform, and now the media isn't perfect. Isn't
Why
like
is it false?
Why is
Because
it
they
false?
are benefiting student athletes.
No, because what Ross concludes at the very bottom of our case tells you you can't fix a broken system by just throwing more money at it. There's
Why
systemic
is it
problems.
broken?
There's just
Like you say it's broken because exploitation and these coaches and these big name schools
What I'm
are
saying-
making
what I'm
profit.
saying,
So if you
the
share the profit
NCAA
with the students,
is
first
inherently-
you end the
The
exploitation.
NCAA is inherently profit-based, meaning
Right.
that even if
So
you
if you
pay
share
student
the-
athletes, the exploitation is still going to occur.
But
You
at
have
the
to make
very
systemic
least, if you
changes.
share the profit with the students, you're making a step towards ending this exploitation, right?
Okay, let's talk about that. So how do you do that specifically?
Wait, by paying students, by letting them profit their image. Like you're sharing the profits with them, so that's
So like how much
decreasing
of that
their
profits will
exploitation.
go like let's talk about endorsements, right?
Sure.
So like if they get endorsed, will the like profit go like straight to them? Or
Yeah.
what?
Like I'd say in a lot of cases it does.
What do you mean a lot of cases?
Like if you allow student athletes to start businesses or sell merchandise, I'd say a lot of that profit goes to them.
Okay. Any other question?
You can have another one since I just asked.
Okay. I don't have a question. We can just send it off.
Wait, there's one for a second. So you say there's a 50% decrease in enrollment with your Miller card. What's the word behind this?
No one tells you specifically that one, a lot of people go to colleges for sports. But second of all, that a lot of people going to colleges in the first place are coming for these lower level sports programs, and no one tells you when you decrease that, you greatly decrease your enrollment.
Can I get the 65% decrease in tuition and the tuition decreases in enrollment in the first?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Then here's the 65.
Sorry, can you show me? Was that the part that you
Yeah, that's $100.
$100?
Yeah.
their first contention where they're talking about preventing kids from going to college. Just as an overview response to all of this, the idea that colleges don't have enough money to pay student athletes is simply false. Look to Schwartz in 2014, who explains that these colleges simply manipulate the amount of deficit that goes into their official records to make it seem like they don't have enough money, when in reality they're making billions of dollars. That's why they have enough profit to build all of these stadiums and pay these coaches millions of dollars in salaries. They do have the money. But then specifically on their first one where they're talking about tuition, they just try to say that tuition across the board is going to increase. But there's several problems with this. First, Strausman explains that part of the reason why this tuition is actually increasing is because colleges want to recruit students and they don't have any other way to actually recruit them. So specifically, when they increase tuition, they are able to offer more in scholarships, which means they can recruit these students. But at the point where you're able to pay these college athletes like minimum wage, as well as use the wage market in order to attract these students, that's not going to happen anymore. But then the second response is going to come from the fact that tuition just doesn't increase that much. Look at James from Business Insider, who explains that there's an estimate of $50.6 million of revenue that will come as a result of paying college athletes, and that this is the money that's going to be essentially spent by colleges. But if you actually look at this, you divide it by the 1,000 schools in the NCAA, and you get maybe like 50,000 per school. Then you divide that again by the thousands of people that actually attend the college, and you get maybe like a $10 to $20 increase in tuition. That's not really that big of an impact at all. But then the second response is going to come from DeRue 2012 from Monroe College, who directly responds to their part about the 65% increase in tuition. So what Monroe specifically says is that tuition has no statistically significant relationship with enrollment, and the reason why that's better than their evidence is because their evidence is analyzing things from the 1990s when tuition was about $4,000 to $5,000, which means that a 100% increase in tuition was a far bigger impact, and that's why we tell you there's no significant impact to enrollment. But then attacking their part about how tuition is going to be increasing by 65%, overall this was analyzing over all of tuition from 2000. It doesn't specifically attribute this to paying college athletes. It just says because athletic spending increases. But athletic spending increased because we started having things like millions of dollars going towards facilities and coaches. Now, going to their second warrant where they're talking about cutting lower level sports programs. When they talk about Title X, realize that it's not because they didn't have enough money to put they didn't have enough money so that they had to cut men's programs. They're just too lazy to increase the power of women's programs, which is why they cut men's programs to make it seem like it was equal. But we tell you that they would never do the same thing in this situation because they simply wouldn't cut major things such as the NCAA March Madness or really lucrative sports like that, which is why you're not going to be seeing the same effect. But then second, we're going to look to Duke Cup 2016, who explains that a lot of these lower level sports are actually paid for by lower level funding from lower level places such as nonprofit organizations or sports-specific associations, which is why even sports that aren't necessarily really lucrative are still able to be funded. These students still get scholarships. But then the last response is that ultimately you're going to be offering more in wages than in scholarships. USA Today explains that the average athletic scholarship is $10,000, while the Chicago Times explains that a minimum wage would be $16,000. So overall, these athletes are still getting more money. But then finally, on cyclical reform, the really critical thing here is that all of their reform happens through NCAA legislation. But what's wrong with that is when you look to Vice News, which explains that all of this reform is actually cosmetic. That's why Vice concludes that even when the NCAA supposedly guaranteed health insurance to all students, it didn't require these colleges to actually pay those students, which is why a large majority of those colleges didn't pay the students, and the funding ended up coming out of their own pockets. But the reason why this is important is because you're going to turn their first impact about complacency. The NCAA wants to give the perception that they're addressing student needs, which means you have even more complacency when you don't vote affirmative and actually feel actual reform. But then on their second impact, they just try to talk about an increase in education. But remember, we tell you that 50% of athletes are dropping out right now because 85% of them are in poverty and they want to go pro. For those reasons, we strongly urge them to affirm the ballot.
Okay. I need to see the vice card.
The vice card? Yeah.
Also, can I see the Strausman card?
Yeah.
Something on you. It's like black. That's why it's so.
You want the cut card?
So I scan
It's like
something.
the
Did you cut yourself? They're right here. Still there. Open your mouth.
It's on vice.
If you put it in the back,
Do you want to see the other piece?
No. So the order is going to be down their case and then back to our case in front of them. Is anyone not ready? Alright. Two things to keep in mind on the full contest. First, Delaney of the Chicago Tribune tells you in 2017 that athletes play in sports not to make a living, as they know they probably won't make it to the pros, but rather for the experience and fun. That is really crucial, as exploitation only means you're only taking advantage of an employee, but players do not have to play. But second, Delaney of the Chicago Tribune continues that engaging in college sports helps athletes succeed in life by teaching them invaluable lessons through sports and providing a clear path to earning a college degree. That's exactly why Delaney quantifies that college athletes graduate at a higher rate than college students who do not play sports. In fact, they are much more likely to get a job and live healthier and fulfilling lives because they're launched into the workplace with experience and skills that give them an advantage. But then, on their subpoint A, first they talk about wages. Two problems. First, you can cross-apply our first contention for another term. What we tell you is that when you vote pro, you increase the cost of academic departments. Unfortunately, when this happens, Dorfman tells you that colleges divert money away from student tuitions. That's logical. Unfortunately, when you increase tuition, you get more people to not come to the college because they can't afford it. That is A, youth turn, but B, it's going to outweigh their argument because they only impact out to college athletes. We're impacting out to every student, every single student at the college. But second, even if paying student athletes alleviates college poverty while in college, the trade-off in education outweighs in the long run. As Bruder's right, that student wages will completely change the NCAA system, losing the NCAA's focus on the student and student athletes. Furthermore, Bruder's continues that giving college athletes money would change their focus, making them care less about their education and more about sports. Even more problematically, we're going to outweigh here, because what we're trying to tell you is that by improving the education quality, there's going to be less poverty in the long run. They're just solving for a short-term impact. But then, second, they talk about making money off the image. You can just drop the entire argument because they don't give you a kind of card that says that when you affirm, you actually allow them to remove that role. I kid you not, they can't give you a card because that's simply not true. But then, on their impact about poverty, two things. First, you can turn the argument as the New Republic states that when student athletes are paid, it comes at the cost of scholarships. Scholarships are not only generally quantified as higher than the wage would be, they are not taxable. Since most student athletes would make more money in our system or the net world, we're going to lead to less poverty in our world. But second, we're always going to outweigh here because we're impacting out to every single student, not just the student athletes like in their world. But then, on their second subpoint about workman compensation, there are three big problems. First, it's entirely non-unique as college sports already provide health insurance. As Bleacher Report explains in 2013 that the NCAA requires all athletes to have medical insurance before they can even participate in the programs at all. That means already these athletes have to have medical insurance. Their impact is entirely non-unique. But second, we would contend is that right now the colleges are being forced to implement more health regulations. That's why specifically in California you see Pac-12 colleges having to put more insurance in place. But third, we would contend that A, all this great reform on health insurance is happening right now because of reform. That means all this terminal defense is going to be offense for us because it's proving that reform is happening in our world. But B, you can turn our entire contention because when you affirm, these benefits go away because you give the NCAA a sense of complacency that allows them to do whatever they want. Now, going back to the con case, at the top, they make an overview that says like they have the money. That's simply not true. If what they were saying was true, then when they had to raise spending to raise more money for athletic departments, they would have taken the money from coaches' salaries or infrastructure like they said. Instead, in the past when they have needed to raise athletic spending, they took it directly from tuition. That's the Greenwald evidence. It's very clear about this. But then second, she gives you this drop in the evidence that says colleges want to recruit. If anything, this is going to mean it's going to be even more of a bigger cost in their world because colleges are going to have a bidding war to increase to see who can pay the most in order to attract these athletes. The cost only gets worse in their world. But then she gives you the gains analysis that tells you it's like only $50 million, and that only means a $20 increase in scholarships. Their card is talking about the federal work-study program. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about the FLSA standards. But then, even more so, she says like our 65% statistic is not specific to paying college. Again, it's very clear. It says that when colleges have to increase athletic spending, they take money directly from tuitions. That's what happens when you affirm. So for those reasons,
so then why are 50% of them dropping out to go to the pros?
Okay, so here's what we tell you. So first of all, what the end of that overview is saying is that colleges technically don't have to pay them because it's up to them whether they want to play or not.
That's not my point. So
Okay.
you say that the reason why they do sports is to have fun, right?
Sure.
So then why are 50% of them dropping out to go to the pros?
Okay, so first of all, what we would contend is that even if they are dropping out, it's always going to be worse in
That's
your
not,
world.
did you answer my question?
Okay, what is the reason why?
Because the money is at the pros, right?
Sure.
Okay, so that means if you increase wages, does that stop them from dropping out?
No, because we tell you wages, like, okay, first of all, we tell you quantifically, like, a scholarship is always going to be worth more than a wage, which means that
When did
either
you tell me
way,
that?
that's what I tell you, it's non-taxable. Okay, I can force
Wait,
them.
you don't give
Yeah,
me-
yeah, I did. I said that scholarships are worth more than a wage. I said
Okay,
it
so
really
how much is
specifically.
a scholarship and how much is a wage? 'Cause
I mean,
read the
I'm not
numbers,
sure
you didn't
because,
read
like, right now, a scholarship, right, is going to cover, like, tuition, board, food, and everything, and it's non-taxable. But in your world, you're paying,
Okay,
like,
so
basically a minimum wage
Let's
with
get this clear,
taxes.
right?
Can I get
You're assuming that when you implement this, like this resolution, you're taking away 100% of scholarships. Why do you get to say that that happens?
what,
Right?
on our
Because you're
second
saying, oh, the
conception?
scholarship's always worth more than the wage.
We're saying
But
a
you're not
scholarship
taking
happens
away
in
all
our world.
scholarships.
Yes, a wage is going to replace a scholarship.
Like, what's the evidence that says that?
Like, that's really logical. I'm not going to give you a full ride and pay you a wage
Why not?
because it would just be costing too much.
Really?
Yeah.
So when you talk about how these colleges have bidding wars, you're not going to use scholarships.
No, the bidding war is specific to the wage. What
Why
happens
is
in a
it specific to the wage? Because they use
Because
bidding
you
wars
can't.
as
No,
scholarships.
you can't. Because they're
Okay.
limited to an amount of scholarships they can give out. But in paying, colleges are just going to be like, hey, I want that guy. I'm going to bid him
Wait, they're
$100
limited to an
$1
amount of scholarships, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these scholarships aren't going to be rising in value.
No, they're limited. It literally says like that's an NCAA regulation. You can only give this amount of scholarships. Can I get a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on our reform, you give this vice card, right?
Yeah.
So what is the date of vice?
Like I don't have a number.
Okay, so it's 2014.
Sure.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Do you have a question?
Okay. Oh yeah, so you said that our like 50.6 million of it is because of the work study program, right? So how much does tuition increase?
What do you mean in our world or
Yeah,
like
in
in
your
your world?
In your world.
No, tuition doesn't increase in our world.
Really?
That's what we're
Wait,
trying to say.
I mean,
Tuition
yeah,
increases
so
in your world.
if you affirm the resolution, like if you negate the resolution, wait. How much
Okay,
does tuition
when you affirm,
if
you
you pay college
increase
athletes?
tuition.
Yeah, so
So-
how much does it
So I can't really quantify this like specifically,
Okay, sure.
but what we're telling you is that because it would cost so much, that would lead to a
Wait, so
large
you
increase
can't
in
quantify it, but you're telling me it'll cost a lot?
Yeah, it's like you can call for the evidence. It said it was increased
Give me
tuition
the
cost a
evidence
lot.
that says.
Like I don't have it memorized word for
Wait,
word.
your evidence just says it's increased because athletic funding has increased.
No.
But I
It
responded to
says that tuition fees would increase if you were to pay student
Okay.
athletes.
Let's see that. Yeah.
Paragraph with highlighting stuff.
So
main offense comes from decreasing enrollment by increasing tuition and decreasing scholarships. However, there are a key couple pieces of defense they have to respond in order to win this contention completely. First, Schwartz explains that the schools intentionally create deficit spending to appear as if they run a profit. In reality, the schools have this money, they just don't use it because they're not forced to pay student athletes. But second of all, Strassman explains by forcing them to pay student athletes, you're actually giving them a way to rewrap the spending. Because the reason why they spend on facilities and coaches right now is because they want to persuade these students to come to universities. When you pay these student athletes, that provides an avenue for the colleges to give the wages to them. The third of all, on Gaines explains that it'll cost $50 million across the board to pay these student athletes, which means that if you do the math, for each student, it'll approximately increase tuition by only $10. Their impact is mitigated there. You don't give them any access to enrollment and decreasing education. But finally, DLU is the most important because it explains that tuition has no relationship with a decrease in enrollment on net, which means that even if you give them tuition, that doesn't actually lead to their impact of decreasing enrollment. But finally, Trahan also explains that scholarships on net don't decrease because cutting scholarships doesn't give colleges more money. That means that that's all this defense that doesn't give them access to their other risk contention. But on reform, Vice Sports, which they call for before rebuttal, specifically explained that all these reforms are cosmetic. So when you affirm the resolution, you actually change the narrative of complacency by forcing the NCAA to pass actually effective legislation instead of just the cosmetic reforms they have in the status quo. They're going to talk about how reforms all happened in 2015. However, realize the card is very explicit when it says that every piece of NCAA legislation is cosmetic. But the reason why you vote for the affirmative is because first, we decrease poverty. Remember, 85% of students currently live below the poverty line. That's why 50% of them drop out to join professional leagues, and so that they can make more money. When you solve for this gap, you effectively solve for graduation and enrollment. We're leaking directly into poverty and long-term benefits right there. That's where you can sign your ballot. The second on compensation, they just say that in the status quo, schools require insurance. However, the reality is that schools aren't paying for this insurance, so that only increases poverty because students have to pay for it out of their own pocket. Thus, when you have workers' compensation, it ultimately benefits them in the long term because 35% can't pay for basic needs because they have to pay for medical bills. Thus, these reasons clear from the resolution.
Okay, I see the students have to pay out of pocket.
Also, wait, can we see the Strassman card?
Yeah.
Oh,
Actually, it's fine.
I'll be going, starting at the top of our case and going to their case. I'll sound close along the way. Is everyone ready? Okay, let's stop on the negative case, extend a bunch of stuff. First, I try to tell you, I just overread that like schools are making millions right now in the status quo, but the historical precedent disproves whenever Greenwald tells you specifically, whenever colleges have to increase athletic spending, they look towards tuitions. That's why Greenwald finds that in states with high athletic spending, there's been a 65% increase in tuitions. If what they're saying was true, they would have to siphon money away from tuitions. Obviously, that's happening in the status quo, which means they're not making a lot of money. But then second of all, they send Strassman who tells you that like, they can just recruit athletes by paying them in the first place. But one, they don't respond to the term replacement. They were saying that if you start paying student athletes, you start creating a bidding war, which means in the long term, we're going to increase the cost of actually having you're going to increase the cost of recruitment. They can start having a bidding war. That's on net bad. But then second, third, they're in the game card that says like there's only 50. It's only going to cost $50.6 million. But they don't respond to the fact that this evidence is talking about the federal work study program, not the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act is a lot more expensive because you actually have to require minimum wage, whereas the Fair Work Study does not. But then fourth, they read the card that says that there's no correlation between tuitions and enrollment. But one, our evidence outweighs their evidence on magnitude because our evidence analyzes 600 different colleges and universities and finds there's a statistical correlation between an increase in student $100 increase in tuitions leads to a 0.25% decrease in enrollment. You prefer this evidence over their evidence because their evidence is only analyzing like a specific time period, but ours is analyzing more data than theirs. But then second of all, at that point it's in the impact. But then second of all, they quickly drop our second link into why a trade-off happens. We tell you that a lot of programs right now in these status quo are going to cut off if you start increasing athletic spending. At that point, we tell you that like if you cut off a program, you decrease your enrollment by 50%, which means less people are going to be going to school in the first place. But then on their case, they're explaining to a lot of things. First, they drop routers to tell you that paying student athletes, you shift their focus away from academics onto athletics, which means you're harming the quality of education. But second of all, they keep on trying to extend the fact that 85% of college athletes live in poverty right now. But we would argue if we allow those student athletes to actually graduate in the first place, we would argue that would decrease the amount of poverty by 3.5 times, which means one, in the long term, we control the internal worm into poverty in the first place because one, we outweigh on skill perfecting every single student, not just like a couple student athletes.
So you said that school affect every single student. So at what point does like tuition have to increase for like enrollment to like for a student to decide not to go to college? So if like for example, if I'm paying like $40,000 for like Harvard, and the tuition increases by like $3,000, does that mean that I'm not going to go?
Well, what our study specifically tells you is that a $100 increase in tuitions in the first place leads to a 0.25% decrease in enrollment. The reason why is because like
But
in
does
the
the
advice.
study assume that like the amount you're paying for college is $4,300?
No, it looks at the fact that in 600 different colleges, the evidence analyzes 600 different colleges and universities and finds there's a statistic. No, from 1991 to 2006.
When college tuition was like $4,000.
Okay, what does your evidence say?
That was 1991.
Look, first of all, like we can give you 6 different studies that say the exact same thing and probably even a higher increase. But
Wait, you
second of
don't
all,
think 6 different studies?
like we can show you. Like it's obviously.
Okay, second of all,
makes sense.
What does your evidence? What does your evidence say? There's no statistical correlation. What does it specifically analyze?
Luke explicitly says that tuition has no.
Like what does he analyze? What does it analyze?
So, okay, I'm just gonna explain really quickly. So the reason why your study is flawed is because back in like that time period, the amount of tuition was drastically less, like $4,000 to $5,000. It means a 100%, like a $100 increase in tuition is far more drastic than it would be now.
If anything, then now a $100 increase is going to mean even more because tuition is at a higher rate, right? Okay, so no, we agree. No, wait. Like, hold up. Like, even accounting for inflation, over the past like 20 years, tuition has increased a lot, right?
Yeah. So like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
when you
any
increase
even
by
like a
$100
small
more.
increase now is going to mean a lot more than a small increase back then. Yeah. Okay, so if I'm like paying $50,000 right now, right, and I used to pay like $20,000, if the price goes up by like $2,000 back then, and if it goes up $2,000 now, it's gonna mean a lot more.
Each dollar is worth a lot more.
Yeah, I understand what inflation is, but
So tuition is increasing, is increasing so much in the past like 10 years. Has enrollment been decreasing?
I mean, yeah, that's
How
what.
much has
That's what Helmut tells you.
No, Helen says that like there's a 0.2.
Yeah, and he's analyzing there's a
But
decrease.
like I'm asking historically,
that's fine.
has college enrollment? I thought we were 49 seconds.
Oh, well.
Does college enrollment decrease?
Well, Helmut tells you specifically that when you look at over 600
Like I'm
colleges.
asking empirically.
Yeah. So Helmut looks at that and he finds that there are 100. Every time you increase tuition by $100, you decrease the amount of enrollment by 0.25%.
No, I'm asking like accounting for
Also,
like this.
Helmut is
You
looking
say
from
that,
like 2000 to now. Like,
You say that because of like athletic
inflation
spending,
hasn't
like
increased
college
that much.
tuitions have increased 65%. So because of this 65% increase in tuitions, have we seen a decrease in enrollment? Like using your own evidence.
Because like according to you, like 65% should be catastrophic, right? So where's the evidence that says enrollment decreased?
No, okay, look. Yes, like,
So
logically that makes sense, right? But what we're trying to tell you is that every increase you give is more or less people going to the college. That's
Like,
really
there's not a logical reason
Like you
behind
say,
that.
you're
That's
affecting
okay.
every
Okay,
single
look,
student.
like it all comes down to the fact that if I have to pay more, I'm less likely to go to college.
I'm not a part.
I'll just take it up there then.
Okay, so it's gonna be enrollment, workers' comp, or the reform, and then back in our case. Is everyone ready? Starting off on enrollment, the really critical thing here is they can't tell you how much enrollment actually decreases. According to them, there was a 65% increase in tuition. They don't give you an evidence as to how much enrollment decreased. That's really important because you can extend the Duluth curve, which tells you there's no statistically significant reason why it would decrease enrollment. That's going to outweigh their study because their study is really outdated and doesn't account for things like inflation. They just try to tell you that it does. So then specifically, you're also going to be extending Trahan, which explains that you're not actually going to be cutting scholarships because the number, like colleges offering more scholarships doesn't cost them money. It just means these colleges now have to take in additional students, but that's not actually a cost to the college, which means they're getting scholarships and wages, which we would argue is on that a good thing. But then on reforms, remember, none of these reforms are actually going to happen. That's why specifically right now, all of these athletes have to pay for them out of their pay for health insurance out of their own pocket instead of getting it from colleges. But then back on our case, first you're going to be extending proper compensation. They really don't respond well to this. All they do is cross-apply some of their own analysis. But look specifically to EDO, which tells you that 85% of college athletes live below poverty. They tell you themselves that these college athletes play sports for fun. So ask yourself the question, why are 50% of them dropping out to go to the pros? The answer is because they need the money, so they're chasing these unrealistic contracts. But in reality, only 2% of these college athletes are actually going to get to the pros, which is specifically why you need to pay them wages. Number one, you're going to make them more focused on their education, but number two, you're also giving them a safety net, so when they don't make it to the pros, they actually get some sort of amount of money. But then they try to try to tell you that there's going to be a less focus on education, but they completely ignore the evidence from our case, which tells you from the AOL that graduation rates are going to increase significantly because now college athletes don't have to worry about financial expenses. They can rest easy and actually focus on their education. But then going to workers' compensation, this is going to be a really important impact into the round because the only thing they say is that right now colleges are going to be paying medical insurance, but the fact is we already responded to that with the Vice News, which they call for and don't respond to, that these colleges aren't actually paying the workers' compensation. That's why we tell you that Litchfield explains that this workers' compensation is always denied, even when these athletes are incurring huge injuries, and that puts them in poverty because they have to pay huge medical bills, and the poverty lasts for generations. It's going to be the biggest impact in today's round. For those reasons, we strongly urge affirm the ballot.
So the order is going to be on con, and then going to pro, and then weighing at the end. Right. Is anyone not ready? Right. Starting at the top of the con, they just keep saying that we don't give a quantification of like how much the cost is actually going to increase. A, you can call for Greenwald. It says that when you have to have high levels of athletic spending, you see a 65% increase in tuition base. That is enough quantification for you to negate right there. But B, we tell you, and this goes unresponded by them, we tell you that as a result of having to pay college athletes, you would incur a bidding war, which goes unresponded by them, which tells you very clearly that that raises costs into the millions. It's unresponded. It's a very big way. You realize that the cost is going to increase. But then, they keep extending this to Luke card, which says there's no relationship between an increase in tuition and a decrease in enrollment. However, A, we contend that our evidence is from 2000 to 2008. At that point, the conditions haven't changed that much to actually have a significant impact. But B, we can literally outweigh on their, like our evidence is much better because it's looking at 600 different colleges. Their evidence is very specific. You should prefer our evidence because it's covering a lot more ground. Now, that's a big voter for us because at the end of the day, we are always going to link it better to our impact because A, on magnitude, poverty is like 3.5 more times likely without a degree, and B, on scope, we're impacting out to every single student, not just the athletes. With that in mind, let's go to the pro case. On poverty, they just keep extending the fact that 85% live in poverty right now. First of all, we would contend that we're increasing graduation wage, we're solving back. But second of all, we're going to contend, which goes dropped by them, is that in the long run, we are solving back better because the quality of education is more important than the short-term impact of them. That is really crucial because it's always better to impact us to the long term than just the short term. But number three, we would contend is that, which also goes unresponded by them, is that college athletes graduate at a higher rate than non-athletes. That is really important evidence in today's round because it proves empirically that being a college athlete athlete in our rules is a good thing insofar as like increasing your graduation rate. And finally, on workers' compensation, they just keep saying like students have to pay out of pocket. They give the vice card. However, our evidence postdates them on the reform thing. Our evidence from Denver Post is from 2017, telling you that reform is happening right now as a result of the net world. But number two, we would contend that the reform is already happening. That's terminal defense, which goes unresponded by them. Like we're gonna outweigh 8 on magnitude. Poverty is 3.5 times more likely. Be on scope. Every single student, not just the athletes. For that reason.
Oh my god, dude, I hate this. It's not good. No, that's listed as one.
I just need to see a new evidence. Yes.
Dude, they know.
Which one do you want, the health insurance area
Yeah, it's so
or like
stupid.
the